Hi, I'm Sarah Ramrup. Part of the technology team at Maritz Global Events. And my word of inspiration to kick us off is create. And the reason I picked this word is because I feel like life isn't as much about finding yourself as it is about creating yourself and seeking out new experiences and growth opportunities to become who you want to be. With that, turn it over to my counterpart here, Tim Simpson.
Yeah, well, so before we get started, can I just say that I got my second Corona haircut, Corona teen haircut.
Very nice. I still have gotten 0 haircuts. This is 10 weeks old.
Yeah, well, my wife, I don't trust her with the scissors yet, and I wasn't quite sure I wanted the buzz cut. So anyway, my word is nothing. And similar to what you said, Sarah, this idea of getting to nothing. See, when you can get to nothing, you can then create anything, right? The space of nothing, unlearning what you've learned or what you believe, those deep beliefs that you might have about something, about how to do something or about a group of people. When you can give those up and you can get to nothing, anything's possible, right? And I asked my kids to also make that sign, and they decided to add the word extreme. I'm not really sure. So extreme nothing.
I love it.
So extreme.
That's where we're at right now. That's where we're at. It's extreme.
You're right.
We're doing it.
So we're gonna jump right into this topic, and
let's do it.
Let's see how this. Hopefully, we aren't boring or anything. All right, awesome. So we're speaking here in this first this part of the day in the innovation and inspiration context of that part of the Untethered event, right? And when we sat down to think, we've already kind of queued it up, right? It's this idea of untethering your beliefs about innovation and inspiration in digital events. And so we're just going to keep borrowing the tasks at hand, the one word, and using words like untethering in our title just to amplify the theme of the event. But you're doing technology with Maritz Travel. Maybe we can go to the next slide and we can just talk a little bit about the organization that we represent. You want to say anything about Maritz Travel?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, let me say that Maritz Travel is a Maritz Global Events company and part of the overall portfolio of Maritz. And Maritz as a whole is just all about people and potential. And really becoming the best that we can be, whether that's through sales incentives, whether that's through formidable experiences, whether that's through behavioral science. And so for me, as part of the technology team, we really draw on all of these different elements to create just amazing technology experiences. Tim, what do you want to say about Design Studio?
Yeah, well, I was a former client, as you know, of Maritz, and on the corporate side, so I was a Maritz Travel client. And I was one of the early adapters or adopters, whatever the word is, for the experience design methodology that Maritz had developed in unison with behavioral science team and with a whole bunch of leading academics and thought leaders, and fell in love with the process and the methodology and the thinking. And events, if you were, any kind of event, whether it had been a virtual or digital or a live, face-to-face, whatever, they were like the bane of my existence, when I was leading marketing and communications in the Americas for the company I was with. And they became my most favorite part after I got introduced. And, Design Studio really is about, working with any client or any company, whether that be we've worked on experiences that are related to retail, college and university, events of all types, and for real. And, it's just the opportunity to connect business and people in a really purposeful and intentional way. And we'll talk a little bit about our approach and our thinking around that as we move on. So that's a little bit about what we do, right? All under that Maritz Global Events umbrella. So we thought we'd continue this idea here of using this one word to frame up our presentation. And so we're borrowing it right from what today is all about, and that's innovation. And when you hear innovation, when you think innovation, I've worked and supported and consulted for small startups in the tech space in New York City, and I've worked with a global Fortune 150 company and all over the world. And innovation is one of those easy to throw around buzzwords that you kind of like, it loses its impact, right? Sort of like you could throw innovation in the same sentence as PB and J, and no one would really blink an eye, right? But the reality is that for us, when a lot of people, when they think of innovation, right, Sarah, they might think of what? What's the first?
Technology, right out of the gate.
Right. But we think we're gonna be a little radical here. We're gonna be a little radical. And we're gonna say that that's actually not at all how we want people to be thinking about digital events, right? We actually want people to think that the actual driving innovation that is most necessary right now when it comes to the digital event space is not technology, but rather strategy and design. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? You want to do that? Should we do that?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So, you know, on this slide, you see that, you know, one of the things we've come to realize is this idea that if you think about sort of the way an organization or a company a business is going to make a decision to sort of drive change or shift direction in a strategy that they have, in this case, we're talking about the event space. You know, one of the things that you could do is start with, you know, the people considerations, right? In the case of the digital event space right now, you know, that's your people, which the people equate to attendees, stakeholders, exhibitors, sponsors, anyone involved in the event sort of execution and delivery and the sort of absorption of the experience. And you could start there. You could say, hey, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna do the sort of digital readiness assessment. I'm gonna go out and identify what do my stakeholders and these attendees and these exhibitors and sponsors need to get the digital event experience to deliver, right? Knowing that in some cases that decision is being made from, you know, moving a existing face-to-face event over to digital, or, you know, it's a brand new digital experience. Either way, that's a place to start. Organizations are also looking at it, and Sarah, you and I have experienced this a lot in the conversations we've been having with clients, is that, you know, the technology side, right? So I go all the way over to this side of the slide, and, you know, the technology decision is, hey, I'm going to pull that lever and I'll pick the technology, and then I'll get my people and the strategy and design it all kind of right size inside of that. That's one way to go about it. And then another way to think about it is that, you know, I've already taken and I've spent the time to really think through the strategy that I want to deliver. And I've designed, you know, the event experience on top of that sort of strategic foundation. And now I'll go and start to execute. And there's nothing really wrong there. But if we just think about, you know, one thing that we would advise people and anyone that's in the space and still looking on what they're going to do in the digital event space, the next slide says it all for us. And that really is that, you know, oh, hey, how'd that get in there? Just kidding. We did that on purpose, right? You know, this is the funniest thing. We've had, Sarah, how many conversations have we had where, you know, bells and whistles, you know, element of a platform gets brought up as the main reason for selecting it.
Well, and I think, you know, the industry, the tech companies out there aren't doing anything to help that, right? They keep putting this tech front and center and saying, yeah, it'll do everything for you. You don't need to think about your event or anything specific. And yeah, that's definitely counter to everything that we believe.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, then you look at it from this perspective, it's like, I mean, this is so funny. I don't know. It's like, I hope someone takes a picture of this and like puts it on Instagram or something. But let's get down to get more serious here and go to the next slide. And here's where this is really what has formulated our point of view. And Sarah, you said it earlier. It's like, you know, our organization really is a people-centered, or, you know, science-based type approach to event and experience design. And when we think about that and how we all work in unison within the Maritz Global Events portfolio, it really is grounding the sort of approach that we take in two simple and maybe not so simple things, which is understanding business dynamics for a specific organization, not just their organization, what they need to achieve, want to achieve and accomplish through the investments that they're making at the event, for the event, but then also taking into account the sort of market dynamics of the market that those events serve, you know, and then taking into account the people dynamics, right? And then those two things, understanding those two things, really help to inform strategy and design. And I really want to make a distinction here that strategy and design are not one and the same. right? In my view, it's strategy. Like, let's sit down and really have a conversation on what we're trying to accomplish, why we're trying to do it, clearly articulate what the event is investment is seeking to deliver for the bottom line or top line of that organization. Once we've got that, we can then start to design the framework of the event, design the agenda, design the elements around that. And then that's in the process where, you know, ideation starts to happen, right? But I think it's really important to just stress that right here, like without that, you know, in place, Sarah, how can anyone be making a really meaningful technology solution? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, and I think, you know, we see this in technology, just even beyond digital, right? When we're talking about agile development, software development, we start with business prioritization. Let's really understand who our people are and what the business needs, to then get into all of the story pointing, sprint planning, all of those exercises so that we're building working software that meets market demand.
yeah. And I think it's really great because we also see that if you haven't really thought through the strategy and design and gotten to that fully baked, your tech solution, you may be over investing or making the wrong investment in the wrong platform, adding elements that you don't need, or actually, you know, maybe going for the fancy, you know, bells and whistles of some kind of a platform with fancy avatars, when in fact that would work against driving the kind of engagement you want. So a tech decision later, let's do the understanding work first. Well, which is perfect, because if we move into the next slide, you know, that really does cue up sort of the idea here that what we follow and how we approach event design experience strategy. And this is our process at a very simple level, really rooted in design thinking, but adopted for the space of live engagement. And, you know, when we talk with clients, when we're doing that sort of strategy and design work, we talk about it from the context of, hey, we want to spend the bulk of our time understanding, right? Understanding the business and understanding the people. You know, one of my favorite things that we've started to do, Sarah, over the last couple of weeks is really advise clients on this idea of doing, you know, those sort of attendee digital readiness surveys, not just so much from the context of their ability to work within the tech, how familiar or comfortable they are with different platforms, but also trying to get a sense of how much time would be for a specific audience optimal to be stuck behind the screen, right? You know, the good example of that was the organization we were talking about that does deep learning in the face-to-face environment, where they're doing 2 to 2.5 hour sessions. I mean, I'll tell you right now, that's not for me, but hey, to each audience their own, right? But when you start to have that conversation with those strategists and those event marketers and those event designers, and you start to ask them, well, how are we going to design for that? They're like, well, we think our audience will be able to tolerate that behind a digital screen. Well, in fact, when we actually asked, we uncovered that 45 minutes at the most. So then we have to go back, right, and start to advise and think through, how do we curate and formulate this experience in the digital space that still drives the optimal business objectives, right? And it's interesting, understanding the people and the business. And then we move into this idea of defining. And that's really where you start to just formulate the strategy, right? And then ideating. And that's really the space where you start to do the designing. You start to think about, how do we start to build this out? Then we go, and that's where the tech starts to come in, right, Sarah? That's where we want to start.
I think that's kind of that handoff, right? I'd say we've thought through our personas and our journey maps and all of the elements and moments that matter that we're designing for. And then in my mind, that's where we hand over to tech and we say, fantastic, let's now think through the features and functions that will enable those experiences.
Yeah, and that's where we can then start to bring the whole thing, like it starts to come to life, and the deeper ideation. And that's what we call sort of decision-making and prototyping. It's where we start to like iterate on, how do we do these things and what's going to be most impactful. And, you know, in some cases, some organizations building consensus with the stakeholders that are necessary. You know, and then I guess you could say this is a very circular thing, because then you test and you execute, and then there should be maybe a component of like measurement, right? I think that kind of goes
feedback,
right? But especially in the digital space. But if you keep going through the cyclical nature, the bulk of the time we would say is going to be spent on understanding that if you do the kind of listening that's necessary up front, And then you spend the time defining. And let's say we spend 70% of our time on those two phases, the rest of this thing becomes pretty effortless, right? Think of the one case we did a proposal for a client and then we hadn't done that. They were moving too fast. How much time we actually spent trying to solve the tech and the production things versus actually just being able to say, hey, what is it we want to accomplish? What are the most critical elements? Good, right? So there's some things to consider there, right? So if we go to the next slide, then, so what does it look like when we start to design? Well, for us, you know, this is a tool that our organization uses, but primarily we use this in all of our design engagements from our really strategy and design engagements from the design studio, which is just this idea of the strategic event framework. And, you know, nothing really changes in our view, from the live to the digital experience. Now there are elements that change, and there's some more intention that gets put into journey mapping and to understanding how the face-to-face event persona translates to the digital event persona. Those are not going to be a one-to-one. How do we solve for those? But the strategic underlining or the underpinnings of the event don't change. Every event experience is a reflection of your brand. So we root all of our engagements in a deep understanding of the brand and what the brand dynamics and what's most critical. Not just what the company or the organization wants to get forward, but also equally, what are the current perceptions that the audience has of that brand, so that we can design to either alter those or enrich them or, you know, elevate that further. And then, you know,
Tim, I mean, I think one more thing to highlight here, I think, where it's what I have found in the past, you know, few weeks where we've been talking to clients, is that where we've already done this strategic framework, it's been awesome to just kind of dust it off and to say, hey, what are these phases that we were talking about? What were these business outcomes and guest impressions? And now how do we sort of rethink it now with the digital as our lens?
Yes, and I love that. I mean, and that's the key thing, right? If at a minimum anything, and I'm so glad you said this right where I was about to say, if at the minimum, got to understand the business outcomes and the guest impressions, right? I mean, that's how we can help measure the effectiveness of the experience, but it's also how we can at least guide the overall direction that we take and how we execute and deliver through the tech, right? So that's the framework we use that helps to do sort of define it at a minimum, the strategy. If we go to the next slide, then, where the framework we use mostly for the ideation around the sort of the overall journey map of the experience is really here in the 8 phases of the digital experience. And we've altered this from the face-to-face to account for the digital. And really what this is about bringing purpose and intention to every touch point into the entire life cycle of the event for the attendee. And, you know, I love doing this work with clients because, you know, as we have identified those groups of personas, we can make very individualized journey maps for every persona. And in fact, what we found so far is this is actually even more critical in the digital space than it is in the live space, because for most of us, we know how to act and how to behave and what our motivations are for going to a face-to-face event, right? Sarah, what would you say is your like face-to-face event persona? How would you define like?
Ooh, I feel like I am a huge planner. Like, I want to know what all of the options are. I'm going to read the descriptions. I'm going to make notes and say, okay, I've finally poured over this enough to decide this is what my agenda is. I know which sponsors I want to talk to. I'm going to try to line up, you know, where are the keynote speakers going to be? Can I go hang out with them and say hi? Like, I feel like that's definitely the kind of person I am.
Yeah.
For you, Tim? I feel like it's very different.
You're like the event strategist, like best friend and like ideal attendee. Yes. I'm the opposite of that. Like, I'm the one that they all hate, you know, simply because I don't read anything about the event. I don't register to the last minute. I'm like the guy who's calling the help desk to get a room in the block. And, you know, I'm just like, you know, and then I show up and I haven't looked at the agenda. I can barely find registration. Once I do, I just start to wander, you know, and that works for me because I just want to experience the people and the learning opportunities and the environments. But what's so funny is that all of those things for a persona like me are all of those things that I seek and I want out of the live or the face-to-face event experience are much more of a challenge. to accomplish or achieve in the digital space. So what do event designers and strategists and event marketers have to do to set me up, you know, to eliminate, to not only like woo me in, but to eliminate disappointment I might have, make it simple for me to get in, access the event, and find my way, right? And I think it's really interesting. That's why we stress even more the importance of doing really purposeful journey mapping, and not just doing it something like, hey, this is the journey map I'm going to hold over here as my playbook, but like literally putting that in the hands of the attendee, right? Very prescriptive type of journey mapping. So that's there. And I think, you know, in a year from now, you know, whatever the space of the digital event looks like, whether we continue to, you know, do only digital or we do hybrids, you know, people will start to have a mental map. They'll have an idea of how to act, how to behave, what their motivations would be for attending, you know, what their persona is for the event. But right now, for the most part, people don't. So we have to kind of do the work to figure that out and help move them. But then, to your point, one of your favorite topics, measure it and feed it back. And I think that's going to be one of the best things that people learn out of this digital, you know, this whole digital space, is the ability to see how people engage with content differently.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Tim, that is a perfect segue into where we're headed next. Well done. Into the inspiration. You know, how does tech inspire? And I would argue that you can't inspire until you understand. And so if we go to the next slide, I think where we're really starting off the technology discussion here is that each of these, sort of this whole situation that we're in now, I would argue is largely a social experiment. I don't think any of us have been at home leveraging Zoom calls, team calls, to the point of, you know, Zoom fatigue. Like, all of this is so new for us. And within these tech environments, we're seeing that. And so I think as we start thinking through, how do we as technologists really live into the strategy and design work up front to really pick out a platform that's purposeful, we are essentially curating environments that are meant to inspire. It is our job to really make sure that we have the new tech, the new features and functions, the new novel ways of connecting, because now more so than ever, all we have are, you know, the box here, the laptop, the mobile phone. These are all vehicles to bring in new processes and new ways to bring audiences together. So, you know, Tim, when I'm thinking about technology, what has really been so top of mind for me is the fact that this is just, there's such a need now to adapt this new surrounding that we're in, and we're needing new ways to engage, whether that's you know, thinking about features that allow attendees to connect with one another. We've seen, you know, as we have been working through a number of client discussions, you know, what are the right engagement tactics? So for attendees, could that be connections, whether that's, you know, tables of four, and sort of the awesome dynamic that comes from that, or maybe with attendees connecting to the speakers. So if we want to have Q&A or polling kind of in the middle of a conversation. And then we've also seen it with sponsors, that this is the new landscape that's opened up for us. And I know on the design side, Tim, there's just so many things that we want to think about for how we really show up as best in class, so that sponsors feel like, hey, this is a really valuable opportunity for me, and I'm interested in showing up with my same level of investment as if this were face to face.
Yeah, that's a huge priority for a lot of people, and it's something that we've been working with organizations to solve. And I think that's, I'm glad you point to that. You know, Sarah, you know, one of the things I hear in what you're saying there is just, it's actually for for our industry and for events professionals, strategists, event marketers, whatever, that where digital events have been somewhat of an afterthought or a bolt on to, right? They're a lot face to face. Like this moment in time, this move, whether, you know, the circumstances of how it happens really are not great, but you know, there's some inspiration, and I think we've picked up on this in a lot of calls with people that even there's some who are like, you know, frazzled. There's some that are concerned. There's some that are excited. There's some that have just gotten action and started solving for it. But what you're getting present to, or what I've been getting present to, is how like kind of inspired they all are by this challenge, you know? And I think that's really
absolutely
right.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? So if we kind of go to the next slide, I think what we've uncovered here is just an insane amount of disruption, right? Like bring on your growth mindset, get ready to relearn and repurpose. And I think for us at Maritz, what we've done is said, hey, let's kind of get our arms around all of these different terms and all of these different formats, and let's make sure that our attendees can connect, because there's so much that's changing, and so many of these are so new for us, that to your point, Tim, we are definitely having to sort of really understand our attendees and ensure that they are inspired, whether that's through meaningful content, through world-class features, but overall, just as if we were in face-to-face, but just an awesome, formidable experience. Like that's what we want to provide. And the tech is really the enabler to get us there.
Yeah.
Definitely. So you know what, if we kind of go to the next slide, this is always fun whenever we're talking to clients. And you know, don't try to read it. Please don't. But it's really just intended to show that, you know, we as Maritz, that when we're talking to clients, we've kind of done our homework here. When we say that we've gotten our arms around the digital event landscape, it's because we've done an assessment. We've built it out, and it continues to evolve as we have new products that pop up in the marketplace or new feature sets where we're sort of evaluating platforms going down and different dimensions going across, where we're thinking about technical complexity, data security, can we white label? What are the meeting formats for my people to gather? And what we've uncovered are really sort of two key technology decisions that need to be made so that your attendees feel inspired. So on the next slide, and Tim, I feel like this is where, when we talk to clients, this immediately, I think, puts everybody at ease. Like, okay,
Totally.
We're talking about the hotel. This is the digital event platform. That's where everybody's going to go for the day. That's where, you know, you bring in your branding and your signage and your message, and you sort of make it whatever you want it to be. And then the other key tech decision is the live stream aspect. What's your audio and visual and breakout room structure going to be? And I think even though these terms are different, right? Digital event platforms, I don't know how much any of us were keeping up with that. And even on the live stream and webinar side, knowing that there's been so many developments there, if we just frame it up as this is your hotel, this is your breakout room, all of a sudden we can now orient ourselves. We have that mental map to really figure out, okay, I know what's expected of me and the decisions that I need to make as it relates to this.
Yeah, and you know, I love this, Sarah, because you know this really helps to stress and sort of in a very simple way say, hey, every way that an organization like Maritz Global Events, or you know, or similar event management companies who support their clients, can make be a contribution to the clients in the digital space. It's this: being able to provide a full end-to-end solution, right? Overall project management, strategy and design work, informing a technology solution. If you're an organization that wants to go out and buy a enterprise license to a particular platform, we can help them, right? How would we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where we would say, let's really understand and then curate the best options for each of those, right? In the same way that we would source a hotel.
Right, and it's exact same process. Or if it's a one-off event, or if it's 3 or 4 different events, you know, let's go find the right technology for that audience and for that particular need, versus saying I'm going to go and be all in with one, right? So, and I think that's what's really cool about our ability to support and you know, events professionals and strategists in the space right now, is to be able to think about it this way and continue to serve them the best way we've always done in the face-to-face, just digitally, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So, you know, Tim, I think that lines up really well kind of where we're headed next, which is that ability to right size the tech, right? Where we want to understand and, you know, what are the features and formats? What are the elements that we really want to bring to life in your event? And so I will say, as much as this is, you know, a plug for Hub, which I will say, Allie's awesome, Kiki's awesome. We talk to them all the time, and we're very lucky to have them as a partner and to collaborate.
There is some real good collaboration going on there.
There are some really good synergies. They're cool. We love them. But I want to just really stress, like, this slide really is just intended to say, how much do you want to inspire your attendees, and what do you need in order to deliver on that promise? Yeah. So let's think through per event archetype, I'll say, whether that's, you know, an advisory board or an education opportunity or sales conference? Like, what are the elements that we need to truly design for those folks? And then what are the formats, the ways of gathering to really bring attendees together?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and yeah, and this is just a small cross section of what that, you know, that I-SOAR chart was saying, right? Well, this is really cool because I think this helps to paint some clarity around this. So we got some final thoughts, right? So should we wrap this up?
Let's wrap it up.
So why don't you hit the first one?
All right. So first and foremost, strategy and design are not optional. We should already know that when we're talking about face-to-face events. And if anything, what we've seen is that it's even more critical in a digital event because we don't have mental maps, the personas are different, and we really have to reinforce and nudge our users where we want them to go, especially during a time of immense uncertainty. You want to take the second one, Tim?
I do, because, you know, this is like a pet peeve of mine and what I'm passionate about. Let's not start with how we're going to do this. Let's start with why. Let's get to the point, what we want to accomplish, why we want to accomplish, and start from there.
All right. So technology is not just an enabler, it's an inspiration. If we are not seeing that just based off of how many product roadmaps have shifted in the past 6 weeks to delivering novel ways of connecting, whether that's with sponsors, with attendees to each other, or with speakers, like I don't know what is.
Mm.
And you know what, Tim? I feel like I really love the next one.
Right,
okay, I'm sorry. I have to be that person. So data and insights. What a ripe opportunity for us. I feel like, you know, I'm technologist by day, data nerd by night. Like, this is such a huge opportunity for us, whether that's showcasing new content, experimenting, piloting. Like, there are just so many novel ways that we can challenge our existing beliefs and assumptions and use data to pave the way.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we already hit this one on the opportunity. Go and find a total event solution provider to support you through this, you know, that can really like be your full partner and bring in all the players and like kind of project manage and oversee as best you can. Simplify this landscape to the best that you possibly can for yourself, because it can't be, there's just so many unknowns, right, as it relates to, and this deep understanding, to your point, Sarah, of data and insights and continuing to learn. So with that,
and I would say for our listeners, you know, if they're not sure where to start, you can absolutely send an email to Tim and I, and we'll get you on the right path.
I mean, you can send it to Sarah. I got enough emails. I'm just saying. So, all right. Well, in closing, last slide. Here it is. This is what we would say is the sum it all: strategy, design, platform, and from there, new ideas will come. Let's not seek out how. Let's find the why, and then right size it and deliver a really impactful, engaging experience for your attendees. How's that?
Let's do it. Fantastic.
Yeah, cool. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, guys.